Hi, and welcome back to PJ Maybe. My Sunday stream this week is going to be about the invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1956 original. And I must admit, it's one of my favourites. Starts off as a small town physician is called back because his nurse is worried because there's a lot of people coming in asking for his help, but when they know he's not there, they don't even mention to the nurse what's up. So this one stars Kevin McCarthy and Dana Winters. I must admit, this is actually one of the better ones. It's a very smart movie. I've seen this 1978 one, which is good in its own rights, but the way this one starts off as this guy comes in going crazy. A psychiatrist is called in, and he's asked to tell his story, and he explains how he's a doctor, and his story's going to sound far-fetched, but they need to believe him, or the same horrors are going to happen to them that happened to him. So he starts his story explaining how he was called back from a conference 2 weeks, and people have been complaining about headaches and sleepless nights and things happening. The two main characters in this are very good. They actually work well together. And so I've got the information right in front of me. So Kevin McCarthy is Miles Bennell, and Dana Winters as Becky Driscoll. There's a couple of wee bits and pieces in this I found inconsistent, but there was only two I really noticed, and considering I normally am one that notices wee silly things, I'm sure there's going to be other ones that I didn't notice, but if you have noticed it, please let us know, because I'm always interested to find things that I've missed in a good movie. So it all starts as a friend, Becky, is convinced her uncle is not her uncle. Although later on, the doctor, Miles Bennell, says she had worries about her aunt and uncle, but they never really mentioned the aunt throughout the whole thing. It's only when he was telling someone else I thought was quite weird. But after talking to the uncle and questions he asked him, he seemed to know everything. So he looked like him, sounded like him, and had all his memories. So he thought the girl was just having a psychotic breakdown. And then was the wee kid running away from his mum, saying it's not his mum, and having issues. And he thought he was just playing up because he didn't want to go to school, because that's what the mum told him. So he speaks to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist mentions similar things, and he says very similar. And he says, I've had a lot over the last couple of weeks, and he puts it down to collective psychotic breaks. And it's actually worded quite well. The whole build up to the story, you don't see what's causing it. You don't know what's causing it. Is it just something that's affecting people's minds? You don't know. But the way it builds up to it is actually very well done. It's a slow build. The people are actually changing without really knowing they're changing. The story obviously is all about people being replaced, because we know it's not a new movie, 1956. So if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry for all the spoilers. But it runs along the similar lines to the remake, which is the Donald Sutherland one, which most people have probably seen. So what I would say is, if you liked the remake assume the remake, the 1978 remake, is a follow-up to the original, and I would definitely recommend watching the original. Similar premise. The Donald Sutherland one, it's Matthew Bennell and an Elizabeth Driscoll. Slight changes to the names. Obviously, Becky's a short down for Elizabeth, so they've obviously just updated the names. But why they actually changed the names, I'm not entirely sure. But if you like the Donald Sutherland one, I would watch this one. It's almost like a prequel. Although the Donald Sutherland one's more like a sequel, but you know what I mean. This one, there's a couple of wee slight goofs that I've noticed. There's one where the character Jack, played by King Donovan, which I must admit, I love that name. King Donovan, superb. He basically is having a cough. He's in the kitchen with Becky and Miles, and she hands him a coffee as he's going out, and he says, "Thanks, Dana." And the actress is Dana Winters, so he called her by her proper name rather than a character name, and they didn't edit it out, which I must admit was quite weird if you notice it. There's also a part near the end, which I'll leave until later on, which were the two main things that I noticed. The first one, I must admit, the way the story builds, you don't see the pods and why it's happening until a lot later on. You see bodies that are not quite finished. You see the pods later on as they're building the duplicate. And the whole premise of it is, once the duplicate's built, the person goes to sleep nearby, the duplicate takes over. You don't really know what happens to the original body. So that's the premise set up. And what they do is, it's all about the Doctor and Becky, or Miles, trying to get out of the town to warn people. They look out when they're getting chased. They're hiding in his office and waiting for Jack and Teddy, which is Teddy's is Theodora. It's his wife, and he's waiting for them to turn up because the four of them know something's up, and they've seen the pods, so they're trying to get away. So he's waiting for the two of them, and as he does that, he looks out and he sees almost the whole town. Starts off with a bus coming in, and the police take the three people that got off the bus into the car. It's almost as if they've arrested them, and they reckon that's because that's people coming back who haven't been changed. What they're going to do is take them to the cell and get them changed. But the premise, even when they get caught in the doctor's office, or just prior to get caught, they're also watching out the window and they see three trucks turning up, and everybody comes up. It's really silly because the police officer is standing with a megaphone saying, "In truck one for this, and truck two for that, and truck three, and the third truck for this." There's no numbers on the trucks, and would it really matter what pods they took? All they would need to say to people is, if you've got family in this area, take pods. Does it matter what truck the pods come from? And at the end, you see the trucks driving away and they've still got some pods in it. It just seemed a wee bit weird that they seemed to highlight the number of the truck they had to take the pods from, as if they were somehow special depending on what truck they were in. But I must admit, it was a wee bit of a niggle for me because it just didn't make much sense. There's also aspects of it that they pretend to have been changed when they leave, and it's only when Becky screams when she sees a dog about to get run down that makes people suspicious, but it only makes the one guy suspicious. And considering you see that it's almost the whole town that has been changed, and it's a busy town, or busier than normal, they said, for the time of day, nobody else noticed it until he came out and the police officer came back down and called for people to come and help. Then everybody seemed to come in to try and chase them. When they're chasing them, they basically climb a long stair. Why they didn't try and steal a car, I don't know. But they seem to run up the stairs and try and they walk past 2 cars. Why they didn't even try to see if they could actually get in the car and get it started. You know, it's like some of the old movies, they've always got the keys above their visor. So they just seem to run and they get chased by the town, and then they end up in a cave or a mine shaft and they hide in there. And the silly part is one of the guys that are coming in to search for them falls right where they are, and accordingly didn't see them, yet there's gaps that they're watching what's happening above them. Another wee niggle. Can't help myself. But nearer the end, when Becky gets transformed, she's tired. He comes back after searching out to see where the music's coming from. They think it's other people who are still untransformed or not changed, and he finds that it's just they're listening to a radio program. So he comes back and she's lying there as if she's half asleep. To me, that would have been the perfect one. She was asleep and it wasn't her, it was a doppelganger. But it wasn't. So he picks her up and he carries her. But for some reason, she seems to fall asleep for a couple of seconds, and then as soon as she wakes up, she's a pod person, which didn't make sense, because the whole premise of it is they're being replaced by these pod people. You don't know what happens to the original characters. You don't know. Obviously, in the later movie, they go into what happens to the people. But in this one, they didn't know what happened to the people's body after they were replaced. Yet, in that instance, she suddenly turns into one of the pod people. To me, it sort of countered everything else within the movie about the pods and them taking over. Because if it was only a case of you had to sleep next to a pod for you to become the pod person, then why do they need the pods? Why did the pods grow another body? It makes zero sense at that point. Don't know if it was a case of they wanted him to suddenly realise that she changed. But if he'd come back and she was lying there and he picked her up and then she tried to convince him, it would have been better when he realised that it wasn't the same person. Because they've got no feelings and no love. So he kissed her, and that's when he knew, and that's when she opened up, saying that it would be easy if he just let go. The fact that she changed so quickly, it almost implies that her body get taken over rather than being replaced by the pods. And even at the end, after he tells his story, the psychiatrist and that just do not believe him. And it's only when something else happened that they go outside and there's a guy bringing in a body, somebody who's injured. And he says, he was lucky because he got knocked down, it sent him flying. And he says, you would never believe it was a load of pods in the truck. And they asked, where's it coming from? And they said, the town where he said the thing was happening. What was it? Santa. Oh, what's the name of the place? There you go. I can't even remember the name of the town. Santa something or other. Let's see if I can find it. It's Santa something. Where is it? Come on. No. Anyway, name of the town's unimportant. Although it will annoy me until I actually find it. But then it finishes off with the psychiatrist telling all the police officers there to send out an all-point bulletin to all the other police officers to start blockading the town, stopping all the trucks, all the traffic coming in and out, and he gets onto the FBI, which Miles, or the doctor, was trying to do in the first place, but it kept getting stalled by the telephone operator who'd obviously been taken over. So, all in all, the movie is quite suspenseful because it is a slow build. You don't, like a lot of movies nowadays, they would start it all and things would start happening very quickly and it would be all effects and seeing this, and you would wonder why people wouldn't actually tell people this and that. This one is a slow burn, and even although it finishes with the FBI getting called in, it could leave it open to have a sequel. And that's why I think you can assume, you can take the 1978 Donald Sutherland one as a sequel as such. Although the characters are similar names and such like that, they're different enough that it doesn't matter. But it's almost a good one. And the fact that who do you call him? Kevin McCarthy actually has a small role at the end of the 1978 one as the running man. Basically, it's just a wee part. So it's a nice wee nod back to the original, but he could be the same doctor and it would work. So if you've got a chance, check it out. It is definitely one of the better movies out there. They have done an original, and I don't normally they have done a remake, and I normally do not like the remakes. And the remake of this one was good in its own right. It took the premise from the original and built on it, rather than actually try to do a full remake and then changing it out of all recognition. This one, the remake, the 1978 remake with Donald Sutherland, stands on its own. But I would still say I prefer the original. So there was a couple of, as I said, a couple of wee goofs. The goofs are Jack called the actress by her real name rather than her character name. So instead of saying thanks, Becky, he says thanks, Dana. The bit where she sort of falls asleep for a couple of seconds, then wakes up and she's the pod person, contradicts the whole premise of they need to be sleeping next day for the pods to absorb all your knowledge before something happens to the original, which we don't know because it never tells us. And the fact that she just goes to sleep and wakes up as the pod person makes no sense. There's other wee things, like, for instance, they mention when they're doing it is the police are putting all points bulletin out about a black and white car. Obviously, it's in black and white, so. But when they drive in to hide the car just looks a single one colour. Same make and model, but it's a different colour. It just looks like a grey car rather than a black and white one, which you've seen throughout. It's almost like they wanted it to fit in more with the cars it was parking next to, so it wouldn't stand out, because they were all very monotone colours. So that's what it looked like, but that could have just been the way it was filmed. And although if you watch it properly, you see the car as they drive in, sort of doink, a slight nudge to one of the other cars as they drive in, and you can sort of hear it. And there's also the aspect of it, there's another bit with, she's boiling eggs for him and she asks him, do you want them 2 minute eggs? And he says yes. And then they hear a noise and it's just the boiler repair guy. And he goes, so only me. And then she goes, oh, the eggs will be burnt, they'll be hard boiled. And it takes seconds for them before they go from, they hear a noise to the guy saying, it's just me. It's no been 2 minutes. It's certainly no going to be long enough that the eggs are burnt. But that you can take as just a wee glitch in the time frame. It's not a major issue. So if you want, get a chance, get the 1956 original of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I have both and I enjoy both. I prefer the original. The original is just one of the all-time greats. So that's that. 20-minute review of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. What next? And I did say I would actually talk Blake 7 Season 1. I remember seeing Blake 7 when it initially was on British TV, and I loved it. I watched it again probably about 10 years ago, and I've not watched it since then. So a lot of things I remember, but a lot of things you forget. You forget the small things in it. And I must admit, I liked the first season for the simple fact is, unlike now, where if they were remaking it, all the characters would be introduced. The ship and the premise of it would be all introduced on the first episode, and it would go from there. Whereas this one, it doesn't. You don't even see. It just gives you 3 of the characters. You've got Blake, you've got Villa, and you've got Jenna. They're the 3 main characters that you see. And although you do see 2 of the other characters in the background, they don't speak, nothing. And I think that is a good example of the build-up of the story. So I'm just actually calling up my notes on this. And there it's here. So you see Villa, Blake, and Jenna. It's all about Blake's trial, why he's actually they put him on trial, what they're trying to achieve from it, because he was a resistance leader who had his memory wiped, but they don't want him to be they won't kill him because they don't want him to be a martyr to the cause. So they trump up charges and get him shipped off. And in the first episode, his lawyer believes him, tries to investigate it, and end up getting killed. The person who's involved in it, who caused the massacre and killed the lawyer, you don't really see after the first episode. He just sort of appears episode, and he seems as if he's going to be someone who's chasing him or whatever, just the way he talks, and then you never see him again. They bring in somebody else to chase him. But that is the first episode, the way back, and it's all about the former resistance leader who witnesses a massacre, and he gets trumped up charged to get him off planet. And then while he's in the holding facility before he gets shipped off to Cygnus Alpha, the penal colony, he meets Villa and Jenna. Villa, I must admit, was my favourite character at the time, and I can understand why I did enjoy him a lot more, because he plays it for fun. He just looked as if he was having fun playing the part. Second episode, Spacefall, is all about the prison ship, which I thought was typical British naming. It was the prison ship London, which you can imagine nowadays it wouldn't. It just wouldn't actually have a name like that. It would have some weird and wonderful name. So, in effect, they try and take over the ship, and it fails, and a couple of people get killed, guards and prisoners. And considering the size of the crew and the number of prisoners and the size of the ship, so you can infer the size of the ship based on the crew and the prisoners and the space they've got. And they come across this derelict, and it seems to kill any of the crew it goes on. So they decide to send in prisoners. In this one, you see you meet Avon and Gan. they're in the background in the season 1, but in season 2, they start. They've got words. They've got talking part. Whereas if you watch season 1, you wouldn't think they would actually be part of it. And a couple of the characters you think might be part of the crew get killed off. And it's almost a case of they build up expectations and then they basically kill them off, and it's a case of you're never going to find out. You are not going to know who's going to be in the crew, who's not going to be in the crew, what's going to happen to the people that you're spending time getting to know. So that's where they introduce Avon, Gan, and the ship, the Liberator, and the computer Zen. So that's 2 episodes in, and they've still not brought all the crew together. And episode 3 was a fun one with the great Brian Blessed. Everything he's in, he's just a very similar type of character. He's just obviously over the top, and and for that, I think he's fun in the part. So they basically, now they've got the ship, they want a crew, so they decide to follow the prison ship London to Cygnus Alpha so they can get a crew and free the prisoners. In the previous episode, you see this the Liberator next to the prison ship, and the prison ship looks tiny. It's implying that Liberator is a vast ship. And yes, you never find out how big it is. You only see the bridge, you only see the computer room, you see a couple of corridors, you see the teleport room, but you don't really see a lot more of it. But they talk about a lot more of it, like a store where it's got all this jewellery and wealth, and they've obviously got food there and stuff like that. But you've only got two characters. So from Blake 7, if you include Zen, you've got Blake, Jenna, Villa, Avon, and Gan, and Zen. So you've got 5. Still somebody, or 6 even. Blake, Jenna, Villa, Gan, and Avon, yes, and Zen. You've got 1 missing. So you're in the 3rd episode and you've not met the full crew. Anyway, 3rd episode is all about Brian Blessed is a priest, and he wants to, on the prison planet, he's one of the descendants of the very first prisoners, and they set up this religion to keep things going. They pretend that the prisoners need a drug every day just to keep them, and it's basically keep them in order, make them scared. So if they don't do what they're told, they don't get the drug, they'll die, although it doesn't do anything to them. So they go down, Blake and the crew go down to try and free the prisoners, and end up having a fight with all the priests of this religion, with Brian Blessed wanting to take the ship so he can spread his message of his God. And in effect, they don't, because we know it's all about Blake 7. So if the Liberator was taken off him, then it would be a different story altogether. But it was a fun episode with Brian Blessed. The 4th episode, Time Squad, they find a small ship, and I must admit, I wasn't really keen on this episode. It's just, I don't know, there was something about it, it just wasn't my favourite. You've got this crew that are guardians, and they're very violent, don't like anything, yet they talk about the ship, how they must have been peaceful because there's no weapons on board it. So if they're an ultra aggressive, you think they would have weapons, or the ship would be armed, even though it's an old ship. It just didn't seem right what they were saying about how they must be peaceful because there's no weapons on board and it's a one-way trip. Yet they talk about how they're very aggressive and they're very xenophobic, and anybody that's a threat to them. It was probably, to me, it was the weakest of the first season. Although it's quite a narrow thing between the Web and Time Squad. The Web was the 5th episode, and this is all about genetic engineering. And I must admit, when I saw, we've obviously been introduced to the new character, Callie, the 7th member of the crew. But these are in the Web, Callie, she reckons that the people who took over her brain and Jenna's to get them where they wanted them to be are people from her own race who were banished because they were too powerful. And when I saw the tank with the guy with the head and the wee spindly body, I laughed. It wasn't scary or intimidating. It was hilariously, stupidly funny, even considering Blake Seven's animatronics and such like, and their graphics and their space flights are very monolithic. Basically, if you want to see a space flight, it's basically just pictures of spaceships, and then you see, or it's just the model of a spaceship moving away, or you just see if it's firing something, you just see a wee bit of it with the graphics and such like, and the animatronics and stuff like that are not the greatest, but they're of their time. Some of them are quite good, like for instance, the Web, the small creatures. To me, it looked like they were played by kids, but the costumes were quite detailed in that respect. It was basically, there was a lot of them, so they could, when they wanted to, create decent effects. But with the genetically engineers, the race that is trying to genetically engineer these servants, it just looked ridiculous. A head on a wee spindly body in a tank. Reminded me a lot of the face of Bo, but you just imagine the face of Bo when it's a wee teeny face and a bigger body rather than a big head of the face of Bo. That's what it reminded me of. And it's another weak one. I think Time Squad is weaker of the two, but it's a close call. The 6th episode, Seek, Locate, Destroy. It's almost trying to explain the history and how things have changed, because it gives you somebody who's collecting. Sorry, I've jumped ahead, so haven't I? Seek, Locate, Destroy is basically when Travis comes in and he's been given the job to seek Blake, find out where he is, and destroy him. If possible, capture the Liberator, but if not, destroy it. So he gets the top of the range ships, and 3 of them, there's always available, and they reckon the 3 of them together could deal with the Liberator. However, it also introduces or reintroduces Servalan. To me, Servalan, Jacqueline Pierce is superbly cast as Servalan. You've got obviously your main characters, so you've got Gareth Thomas as Blake, you've got Paul Darrow as Avon, Michael Keaton as Villa, Sally Kinvet, names are terrible, as Jenna, and Jan Chappell as Callie, David Jason as Gan, and Peter Turdingham as Zen. Are all good in their own way, although I must admit Gan he seems to be standing around doing a lot of nothing, and I think they've probably realised that the cast is probably too big. They either have to give them things to do, or they need to reduce the crew. It would have been better if they had a bigger crew that did nothing, So you had people in the background like the Star Trek crew or that type of thing, where you have people in the background just thinking. They could have had them as, like, I suppose, like Andromeda, where they go onto the ship and it was all mechanoids which are controlled by Zen. Would have been better rather than having the 5 of them in this big enormous, or the 6 of them, and the computer running this big enormous big ship. It would have been better if they had people in the background, or androids in the background doing things. It would have been, I think, a better premise. But that's probably because I've seen Andromeda and things like that, and it looks better with this big ship with things in the background working away. I just can't see. So they basically just going about Zen does the auto repair. It would have been better if they had androids and stuff like that. So they had things walking in the background. So at least a ship that size, it would have seemed a wee bit more believable. Because how many crew could it take? And considering the size of it, and considering the size of the other ships you've seen, to me, it could take quite a bit. However, you do see the interceptors and search, locate, destroy look not much smaller than it, and it only fits 3 people. So there's a contradiction in how you see it, because in the prison ship one, the prison ship is tiny in comparison to the Liberator, yet in the other one, you've got Travis and his 2 mutoid crew in this ship, which is almost as big as the Liberator, because you see it when they're later on when they're about to crash into each other. So it introduces Travis and Severland again, and Travis is played by Stephen Grief, which I know they did change him, but I don't understand why, because he's actually quite good as this psychotic, by the book, or by his book, commander. And in effect, the way he acts in this, he acts as if he's got brains as well as a psychotic personality, because Blake attacks a place, blows it up, and then gets away, and he comes in and wonders why they attacked it, what they hoped to gain. Was it just to destroy it? Then why did they wait 10 minutes? Because it didn't take 10-15 minutes to plant explosives. Why did they move all the guards out? And things like that. And obviously Callie gets caught, but she gets released. Episode 7, Mission to Destiny, basically is my favourite episode of this season. It's a murder mystery, which unfortunately I solved straight away. I know it sounds silly and big-headed, but I think anybody watching it for the first time nowadays would be able to solve it. And it's only the simple fact is because everybody uses passwords. And we all know that when you want to put a word out there, you use numbers. Like, for instance, if an E, you would use a 3. So when I saw the numbers down, I recognised what it was straight away. And it didn't take me long once they started telling you the names of the characters, who it was. And it was, to me, one of the strongest ones, because it was a murder mystery in space with Blake actually trying to find out who caused it. And I must admit, I think because of that, it was one of the best episodes. Some of the characters in it I found funny, because one of the characters was going around, and I don't know if it was a partner or their co-worker who seemed to, when you found who it was, there was a guy lying on the bed and he was the one that was going around with her all the time. He reminded me of Hyde from That 70s Show. What's his name? Is it James Matheson? I'm not entirely sure, but it reminded me of him. So I know it's not him because of when this was filmed. Was it 88 to 90? No. When was it filmed? Blake 7. Let's see. Blake 7. Right. 1978. So obviously there's no way on earth that would be him at all. But it just reminded me so much of him. He just got a very similar look to him. So he has. So I just found it weird. And I would like to actually find out who actually played it, because is he related to him? Who knows? So Mission to Destiny. And no, there's no surnames. It's very similar. So I don't know who it is, but it just looked like him. I digress again, and I've gone on a wee bit of a wander there to the 70s show. But Mission to Destiny, I must admit, was a good premise, and I did enjoy it. And I suppose as an episodic, it would have worked. But obviously, Blake 7's not episodic. It has got the Monsters of the Week, but there's always a ongoing story throughout about him trying to give it, set it to the Empire, the Federation, trying to capture him and sending people out. But there's episodic aspects of it. There's always something different happening, and the Federation popping up every so often just to actually progress it forward, I think, is probably the easiest way. But I think that Mission to Destiny was quite a good episode for that. The next one was Jewel. Jewel was, to me, very trope-like. It's the type of thing you used to see in Star Trek or whatever. They come across a planet, and the people on the planet are so advanced that they could actually take out and stop everything on the other ships, even the Liberator, which is the most advanced ship by the sound of it out there. And they destroyed themselves, so they want to stop people destroying themselves, but it was to the death. Yet, although it was to the death and there was no time frame for it, they effectively let them not do it to the death, because one of them threw down a spear and says, nah. As if he'd learned a lesson, and it didn't seem correct. It seemed a bit weird that they told him it is to the death and let them get away with just turning around and saying, well, I'm not going to kill him. So to me, it was just counterproductive in that one, and it was an okay episode, nothing fantastic. And the next episode is Project Avalon. They're going to find a resistance leader, and the Federation's already been there, and it turns out it's an android, and used as bait by Travis to try and capture Blake. There's not really a lot to say about this one. It's typical. Somebody portrays them and then gets killed with the rest of them. It's very trope-like. Look how evil this Federation is. By people who help them, they'll kill them anyway, just for no reason. Because if they'd actually left him alone, what difference would it made? It just was there to show how evil they were. And everybody in. Right, the last 4 breakdown. It goes to a space station because Gan is got a faulty neural implant. It's starting to go, and he's turning violent. And even this one could have been really good, but the end of it and certain aspects of it, I thought, oh, wait, why? Like, for instance, the surgeon turning around going, I can't let him die, just I'm using it to hold off and delay him and stuff like that. And you're sitting there thinking he's going on about how he's a genius and nobody will turn him down because he's a genius. And you're sitting there thinking, so he's a genius and he thinks he's great, but he's quite happy to let somebody die. But he still goes on about how he's a surgeon and all that. And the way he got him to do it is basically, if you don't, he says, what are you going to do, kill us? He says, no, I'll just destroy your hands, which made him scared. But at the end, the doctor kills someone, and then he's standing there like that, just looking at his hands. And I thought, he's narcissistic, as if that would bother him. Just for the simple fact is he was quite happy for Gant to die on the table as a delaying tactic. Yet he's meant to be shocked because he actually strangled someone. It made no sense. Someone that narcissistic, they would just justify it to themselves. And with the space station getting blown up, even though the Federation were told, make the priority is not destroy it. But they missed, and it just so happened it went ahead and destroyed the station. If they had that clear instructions not to do it, why would they be firing in that general direction? They would have waited to either know they were going to get hit, or they knew that even if it missed, it wouldn't hit the station. Just seemed a wee bit clunky. And the next one, Bounty, which the idea here was quite good, but considering they already knew what was going to happen prior to it, and they talked about it prior to it, it just seems silly because they fell for everything. And everything they said was going to happen happened, and they still fell for it. They didn't take any precautions to stop it. So they send Ghana over to the ship that's they think is a trap because that's what pirates do. And when he calls back to come up, it's Zen, it tells him, but by the time it shows you Villa try to warn Avon, but then it goes to Avon, and then once he starts bringing Gan back up, then Villa's voice comes through, as if you just didn't see Villa transmitting the message. It's almost like there's a delay, and he didn't get the message until after he needed to. And then Villa is told to go and get it. It's just, and then it's people Jenna knew, and she gets an offer again, and she refuses it again, and she works against it, and it's just, the premise was good about that, but the fact is they told you all that was going to happen prior to it happening. Yet, to me, something like that, it shouldn't have been something that they expected, or it could have been an issue, or who it was going to be. They didn't know who it was going to be, obviously. But up until the point where the ship gets caught, they knew what was happening. And then you had Deliverance. Basically, the Liberator crew witness a spaceship crash and land on a planet, and they try and rescue the people. And it's basically all about, is it a new character, would you class it as? It's about a scientist who needs medication to survive because he's a genius, but he's dying. And he took himself out of the way so the Federation couldn't find him. And the son sells the secrets just to get the money to get the medication he needs for his father. But he dies on his way there, but he tries to take the ship, and he forces it, and it just seemed a bit silly with the way they were going on about it. And it turns out his ship, the thing he was building was Orak. And anybody who remembers Blake 7 from the 70s, and even the repeats, and the first time they saw it, would remember Orak. Orak does come into his own later on. But in the first season, it's just the introduction to him. So you find out about the guy who built him and how he's dying, and he gives them to Blake. And then in the very final episode of this one is Orak is given to Blake because the guy who built it didn't get his medication in time. And Travis and Servalan come down to try and get Orak because they've been told about it. Nobody knows what it is until the guy actually explains what it is. However, it didn't have the suspense of a final episode that I would expect, and I did expect from those type of shows like Space 1999, Blake 7. I would expect it's like they used to always do, a final episode cliffhanger. And I didn't feel as if the final episode of the first season of Blake 7 was a good cliffhanger episode. All in all, an introduction to the characters and the situations. Season 1 is great because it's a slow build to bring all the characters together, to get them all in the right place, to discover what's happening about them, and obviously side quests. My favourite one, I must admit, was Mission to Destiny. To me, that was the strongest episode in it, and it was probably one of my favourites. The weakest ones, there's a 2 or 3 weak ones, but I definitely think the Time Squad and the Web are the 2 weakest episodes in this one. And anybody disagrees with me, I'm quite happy for them to come on and actually disagree with me. But I'm only going to finish off here. So I wanted to do an hour tonight because I'm doing it on my Todd. And it was just a case of to bring Blake 7 in. Next week, I'm going to do season 2 of Blake 7. And as a movie review, I'm going to do The Day the Earth Stood Still, the classic, not the remake. So, any comments, please leave them because it does help us with the algorithm. Give it a like, and if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And remember, I'm not old, I'm classic. PJ Maybe out.